Okay, so part two. I appreciate the first video from yesterday was very low, so today um, I'm just gonna try and turn the volume up on the mic and to see if we can get some better quality in terms of sound. One of the things I probably should do. Nope, not that. One, two. Ease up on the compressor, and yeah, hopefully we should get some decent sound today. So yesterday we left off having spoken about the layout of Master Fader 5, and we went through pretty much all the different sections that appear within Master Fader 5. I'm just making sure that this is definitely recording the screen. Yeah, it is. That's fine. Right, so yeah, we left out having discussed all the different sections that make up Master Fader 5. And just to sort of recap, you've got the main mixer area down here, where you've got all 32 channels. You've got your FX channels, your subgroups, and your VCA channels. Above each channel, you also have, in fact, I probably could ease up on the, there we go. I'm just going to ease up on the gate. Right, so yeah, above each channel you also have the options. So these are quick options that you can go into in order to see. Um, these are quick options that appear on the screen. Sorry, and they're sort of quick reference options for you to be able to look at. Yeah, I'm just adjusting the gate there because I can hear some interesting sounds there. Right, so yeah, as I said, these are quick options that you can see things like your compression, your panning, your gating, your EQ, your trim, whether you've got phantom power turned on. And these are things, also you've got this A/B comparison there as well. And that just shows you, in fact, it will go into that when we speak about routing. But essentially you can set up your mixing desk. So all 32 channels, you can set them up and have a specific mix. And then you can have a B side. So for argument's sake, say you have two separate bands that you're mixing on one particular evening. You've got maybe your praise and worship team, and then you've got another team that's going to come on, the kids ministry or something, and they're going to do something else. Um, if they're going to be using the same mics and the same channels as before, the same drums and etc., there's no point in you trying to use whatever free channels you have, and you're more than likely you won't have enough free channels anyway to cover what you need. So what you can do is it's got an A and a B A and B source, and you can actually mix everything, all 32 channels off the section A, and then what you can do is you can switch over to section B, and you can have a completely different mix for, say, the kids ministry. And that way, when they come on, rather than you sort of trying to re-EQ and set everything up for them, you would have done that in sound check. So you just literally hit side B, and that'll then bring up all the settings for their mix, and then you don't have to interfere with what you already have set up. There are other ways in which you can do it, by doing it via shows and going into scenes and setting it up that way as well. So you have different options. But yeah, this is just a quick way. If you want to be able to compare between two different mixes, I mean, you can do that as well. But yeah, just bear that in mind. And that's what this AB is that you see there. So yeah, so we spoke about the mixer, we spoke about this area above here, which gives you sort of a quick view of settings. We also spoke about this area here on the right, okay, and we spoke about how you have mute groups, you've got view groups. So your mute groups are at the top, your view groups are at the bottom, and I'm just going to ease back on this a little bit there. Yeah, so your mute groups are at the top, your view groups are at the middle, and then you've also got the master groups, and this is where you can look at all the master volumes for all the different sections. So you've got all your returns here, and these are all the master volumes for that. You've got your main, you've got your FX, and you've also got your subgroups and your VCAs. So you've got all these three areas here. Today we're going to go into a little bit of detail, and what we're going to do is we're just going to systematically work through we're going to systematically work through this particular desk, and we're going to sort of look at what's available to you within this particular mixer and also within this particular software. Now, as I said to you before, currently you're looking at Master Fader on my laptop. You can have it on a laptop, you can have it on a Mac, you can have it on a Windows laptop. I think you have to have Windows 10, and there's like minimum requirements. Bear in mind, this desk was released last year, so because it was released, I think no, not 2019. It was released at the end of 2018, so it's not going to work. The applications are not going to work on any sort of tablets and devices that are pre that time, if that makes sense. It'll work from whatever operating system was available, and Windows 10 was what was available when this mixer was released. You won't be able to get Master Fader 5, 5.1 or 5 on a Windows 7 or 8 computer. So you need to make sure that whatever you're using is not a dinosaur, basically. But now that we're in 2020, pretty much anything you have now, if you've gotten like a new phone or whatever in the last couple of years, they'll all be fine to work. Right, so today, as I said, we're going to break down the different sections. Now, I'm not going to touch the top part for now. At least I'm going to try and avoid it for now. I'm just going to show you very quickly a channel and show you what is held within that particular channel and what sort of what are the main features you can manipulate other than just being able to turn the gain up and down. Okay, so to start you all off, let's leave this top section that we said gives you important information that you can look at on the fly. This is your panning, so for left and right. And remember, if you watch the top middle, this area here, it'll give you information, but you can also interact with it. So if you accidentally make a mistake and you want to bring that back to center, just hit 0 and it'll bring it back. So you can still interact with this section. As I said to you yesterday, when Mackie were developing this app, they thought of everything. We're not going to look at the mute right now, but what we're going to start by looking at is the fader. So as you can see, if you watch any videos on how to mix, etc., you'll always hear people talk about unity gain, which is 0 dB. And you can see here they actually have next to the 0 dB, they'll have U, the letter U. And you'll see that all throughout here, even on the main, and you'll also see it on the, say if you went into aux, you'll see it there. That's just the unity gain, and don't worry too much about it, but when you're setting up your gain on your channel, it is common practice, or the best practice, to set your level, your fader level. This is a fader, to set that to unity gain, and to set your master level to unity gain. Then that way, when you, particularly when you're doing mics, that way when you go into the and I'm just going to come into this section here. This deals with the routing and stuff, which is why it looks so weird and it's got different lines going into different areas. So this deals with routing, but it also gives you your gain settings. So what happens is when you've got your mic level at unity gain and you've got your overall volume level, volume level at unity gain, like we have here, see there, and the overall main volume at unity gain. When you come to set your actual gain, you would then turn this up until you hear a level that is decent for you. And when I say decent for you, so say for example it's just a standard mic. Most all mixing desks will understand a signal input from a microphone from about 1 volt upwards. Okay, so anything that comes into the desk that is about a volt, as powerful as a volt, it will be able to pick it up and comfortably utilize that signal because it's strong enough. Microphones don't give you 1 volt worth of power. They actually give you less, and I don't know what the figures are, and they will vary depending on what microphone you buy. So if you have a really cheap microphone, then you know it's going to be worse than something that's a little bit better. Having said that, when you're turning the gain up, you're increasing the power output of that particular device, its strength, from wherever it is, particularly if it's a mic, a dynamic mic or a normal mic which you put on a cord, you're increasing its power, its strength to at least 1 volt and above. If you have less than a volt, you'll have distortion. If you have more than a volt, you'll have distortion. The distortion that's more than a volt is it's slightly different to the distortion you get when it's less than a volt. But either way, you don't want to have too little and you don't want to have too much. Thankfully, the measurement for this, so for example, let's just say for argument's sake, you were using just a standard mic and you wanted to be able to determine what range you had from it being too little and it being too much. You actually have quite a wide range. So I'd have said, let's just say for argument's sake, I don't know this for certain, but I'd have said this would probably be the lowest you can go, and I'd say this is probably the highest you should go. If you go any higher than that, you're going to get some serious feedback. It's going to be too loud, too powerful, and moving the fader down, you'll end up having a situation where, to lower the volume, you'll have this fader so close to the bottom and you'll only be able to make minute changes, and it'll mean you'll also have to bring down this because it's too loud, and then your levels aren't, you can't really control anything when it's like this. But if you have it set to start off with at unity gain, and then you come here and then you set your volume level, your gain level, sorry, correctly, what will then happen is if you've set an appropriate amount, so not too, the problem with some of our sort of Afro-Caribbean churches, we like things way too loud, and which is why sound sounds very horrible in our sort of community churches and our community events. It's because we just love, well, I say we, I actually don't like loud things, and it's because people don't set these things up properly. They just fire everything up and it's muffled, and you can't understand what's going on. Anyway, if you set an appropriate level here, and you've got an appropriate gain level here, what will happen is you're aiming to have what we call headroom. So when you set it there, you think, okay, this is loud enough such that I can hear it clearly enough that it's maybe a little bit too strong. It means when you come to your fader, you can then lower that to maybe somewhere about here, and then you'll be like, okay, that sounds nice, that sounds appropriate. And then you'll also set your other microphones, similar levels. Say number 1, channel 1 was your lead mic. You can then set your other microphones for your backing vocalists to appropriate levels to ensure that they're still in the ballpark, but they're not too loud. And here's another thing for you. This is why when I spoke to your sister who came to me some time ago, I speak to a lot of people about this, but one of the things I did at a previous church I was at is I took all their mics off, because each and every mic was from a different brand and a different make and model, and I removed that and I just replaced it, and I donated brand new mics which were all from the same organization. And the reason why I did that is because it allows you to set nominal levels for each mic, so you don't have a situation where you've got one mic which is really, really weak and it's poor, and that one has to be turned up so high, but then you've got another one that's really good and you find that it's so low, and these are backing vocals. How do you mix something like that? Do you know what I mean? But if they're all from the same brand and you've done one backing vocalist, you can safely say the other ones are going to be in and around the same area, depending on how quiet and how loud they are. Maybe the quieter ones would need turning up a little bit more, and the loud ones would need turning down. But you have something that is easy to work with, where you can manipulate the volumes and make minor adjustments without having to do too much. So that's the unity gain function that you see here. The unity gain that you see there. Obviously on the right hand side you've got all the different volumes, so you've got everything up to 10 decibels or 10 dB and minus infinity dB, and then obviously you've got 0 there, so that's pretty cool. Obviously when you're doing sound, we already know that 0 doesn't mean empty or nothing. 0 is just a set level. You can have volume that's minus 0 dB, and you can have volume that's plus 0 dB. So yeah, 0 doesn't actually mean it's off. On the left hand side, you'll see that there are 6 numbers, 1 to 6 here, another 6 numbers, 1 to 6 here, and another 6 numbers, 1 to 6 here. And you might be wondering what those are. When we came back over to this particular section here, you have your mute groups, you have your view groups, and you've got your main master groups. Well, it's the same thing here. So I'm going to go over to this side, and I'm just going to mute channel 1 on the mute groups. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to assign channel 1 to that mute group there. What you'll find is, oh right, so it's the other way around. Okay, never mind. So the mute groups is not the first one. I thought they'd done it in such a way that, you know, it's one, they match up, but don't worry about that. You'll know it because it's red. But there's your mute group 1. And obviously you can see that the channel is muted. So you'll know that this channel here is in mute group 1 because number 1 will flash up red there. If I turn mute group 1 off, like that, it'll still leave the 1 on there, because what it's trying to tell you is this particular channel at a glance when you look at it is assigned to mute group 1. If I assigned channel 2, okay, hang on. If I assign channel 2 to, there you go. If I assign that to mute group 2, you automatically see that channel 2 is now in mute group 2. If I go back to the main mix, you'll see that channel 2 is in mute group 2. So when I finally go here and I decide I'm going to mute group 2, channel 2 automatically gets muted because it's in mute group 2. So these are just quick glance features, and it saves you having to run around and do all sorts when you're actually creating a mix. So that's that. Okay, you've then got your view groups, and likewise I'm going to assign, hang on, put that back to all. So likewise I'm going to go in here and I'm going to assign channel 1 to A and channel 2 to B. Okay, and I'm going to come here and I'm going to stick that in the view group, and you've got channel 1. Now, you see, I would have thought that was going to light up. So is this VCAs and subs then? It has to be VCAs and subs. That's fine. Remember, I told you in the first video, I'm still using Master Fader 5, and you don't have this in Master Fader 5. This is still new. I made the automatic assumption that that lined up with what was on this side, but it doesn't. This should mean that this is... I probably should have checked this before I did the video, but nah, who cares? Hang fire. This is an easy thing to do. There we go. So, subgroup 1. And let's go into the VCA. Channel 2. Let's go back here. Ah, yeah, so this is, yeah. So the first one is subgroups, the second one is VCAs, and the third one is mute. That's fine. It's no problem at all. So yeah, as I said, these are just for illustration purposes to show you where you've assigned different things. Now, there are 6 subgroup channels, and there are also 6 VCA channels. So you just have a quick glance to see what is where. But again, you don't have to always go back into those options. As we discussed yesterday, you will find that once you are here, you can still assign and unassign those channels from there, from the actual channel itself, without having to physically start scrolling across to look for the actual subgroups or the VCA groups and start assigning it from there. It's quicker to just go into the channel if you're already there and just do it from the channel. Okay, so that's that. One other thing I wanted to point out very quickly is if you look at the top here, we've set the gain level on channel 1 when we were talking about gain, and you'll see at a quick glance the gain level is already turned up. Okay, so you will know, and let me just turn on the 48-volt phantom power, and you'll also see it lit up. So we know that we're on mix A. We know that the phantom power for this channel is turned on. We know that the gain level has been set to roughly there, and we know that the this is the trim, by the way. The trim has been set to that. So we have an idea of what's actually going on with regards to our setup, our mix for that channel and every other channel, just by looking in the top section here. We can also see our gain levels in terms of volume. We can also see our subgroups, which are blue, and you can change these colors, by the way, so don't always think, oh, do I have to keep my subgroup? You can change the colors. Your VCA channels, which are green, and your mute groups, which are red. So you know that what mute group this particular channel is in, etc. And just for the purposes of channel 2, like we did before, I'm going to click into it, and then I'm going to turn on subgroup 2 and VCA group 2, and I'm going to come here, and you'll also see that there we've also got 2, 2, and 2 there. So that's pretty much an overview of this box here. Now, next to each fader, you have a meter, and this meter is the obvious, what you'd expect. You've got green, amber, and red. Red obviously means you're clipping, so you need to watch how hot your channel is. If you set your gain too high and the person starts to speak and it goes straight into red, and you know this was at unity and that was at unity, it means you've added too much gain. So you need to come back in here and you need to dial that gain back a little bit. If you've set your gain up and the person starts to speak and there's barely anything going into the microphone, but you can tell they're speaking quite loud, the good thing about this device is you're not stuck at the back of the room somewhere. You can actually walk up onto the stage, stand next to them, and ask them to speak. So you can tell, okay, this person's speaking relatively loud, but there's barely anything coming in through here. Then you know you haven't set yourself up with enough gain for that particular type of microphone. You need to bump that up because it needs to be understood by the mixer. The mixer is just basically saying to you, whatever is coming in is too little for me to discern what's happening. So if I start turning levels up and turning them down, I can't guarantee you that I'm going to pick everything on the voice. So the voice will sound a little bit distorted, a little bit muffled, and that's just due to the fact that the desk is saying there isn't enough coming in. If there's too much coming in, it's saying I'm being bombarded by too much of X, Y, and Z. Now we're going into frequencies, and I don't want to go into that now, but it's just basically saying I'm being bombarded by too much of it. I can't handle it. It's too much for me. Can you please lower that? So again, you need to turn that off. I'm going to turn this 48-volt off now because I don't have anything plugged into channel 1, and if I keep the phantom power on, this mixer is sending 48 volts worth of power to channel 1, which doesn't need it. You're damaging your mixer, so you don't want to do that. So I'll turn that off, and we'll leave that off. Okay, so that's that for now. And I know I said we're going to talk about the subgroups and the VCAs, and we'll talk about them a bit later on. But just to give you a rough idea of what they are, VCAs are master control volumes, and all VCAs do is if you send a channel, or normally what you do with a VCA is you'd send a group of channels to the VCA. And at the end of the day, when you set up your mixer and it's a big event and you've got all 32 channels pumping, you don't want to have a situation where if you've got all your drums, for example, working off these 8 channels here, okay? So we've got kick, snare, hi-hat, first tom, second tom, third tom, and 2 overheads. You don't want to have a situation where I want to turn all the drums down or I want to turn them all up, and then you're busy sort of struggling to figure out, how am I supposed to move all these faders at the same time, but I'm going to mess up my drum mix. So if you want to just be able to, and you know for your set that I just want to be able to turn down all my drums at the same time, or maybe make them play quieter, because I know the drummer is going really, really crazy when he gets to the bit that he loves on the song that he loves. And for that particular section, because it's killing me in my mix, I'm gonna notch it down in the volume, so that the drummer doesn't know any better, because this is coming out of the front of house speakers. So you just turn it down in the front of house for that section, and then when he's done going crazy, you can turn it back up, and at least it doesn't kill the crowd. So what you can do here is you can assign all of those 8 channels to VCA, and one channel can go to more than one VCA, by the way. But you can assign all those 8 channels to VCA group 1. You can then come down here and you can actually name it drums. Okay, boom. And then if you go back to your mixer, you'll see that the VCA, so what will happen here is, different to these channels where you can see meters, you won't see an actual meter, so you can't tell how much volume is going into this VCA channel here. But it just gives you overall control, and you're using your ears to be able to determine how much is coming in and going down. Likewise, what you could also use this for, just for argument's sake, is if you had a choir on your stage and you've got 10 sopranos, 12 altos, but three or four tenors, and for whatever reason the tenor section didn't show up for that day, what you could do is you can assign a microphone, an overhead microphone or a shotgun mic to your sopranos, a shotgun mic or an overhead mic to your altos, and an overhead mic to your tenors. But then what you can do is you can assign them VCA groups. Then you'd probably have a situation where, because these guys are the most, they'll be down here. The altos are the most because there were 12 of them, and then there were 10 sopranos, so you might want that to be louder. But the guys who showed up with less people, the tenors, who only have 4 people, you can whack them up, and then you can have a balanced sound. And you can just spend the whole of that evening or of their set just controlling your sound from the VCA. So, or you can give them all individual mics, that's fine, but assign them to VCA groups, and rather than you spend time trying to manipulate 12 faders at the same time to bring down the alto section, if you assign them to VCA groups, you can just do that from here. And if you want to mute them, you're just there. So you can actually just spend your evening or that particular set just in this area here. You don't have to worry about going back to the faders unless there's something that actually happens that goes wrong. Someone drops a mic, or they get lazy and they point it at the monitor. You know what singers can be like sometimes. So that's your VCAs in a nutshell. Subgroups are kind of similar to VCAs. In that you can send multiple groups, so you can have a subgroup for your drums, for example. So let's just do that, drums, and for this particular subgroup, the reason why you've sent all your drums to the subgroup is because, and you just come in here again at the top, I think you're beginning to see the picture here. So we've got channels 1 to 8 for your subgroups, for your drums, and what you'd normally do is you take the drums out of the main, because if you leave it in the main, it means that the drums are going directly to the main, but they're also coming to the subgroup. If you're going to send them to a subgroup, you'd have to take them out of the main, and then what would happen is all the drums will come to this one fader first, so you'll set them up the way you want them, send them all to this fader, and then you can use this fader to turn all the drums up and down. Now, one of the reasons why you need to do this is this. When you apply compression to a particular channel, it kind of glues everything together. So it makes it sound more like it's one big unit as opposed to it being spread out. So say you had a group of sopranos, a group of tenors, and a group of altos, it would be the same situation. If with subgroups, what they let you do is, the subgroups let you actually apply settings to that particular group. So as you can see here, I can compress that subgroup. So if I was to compress the drums, for example, as a whole, so say when I was doing my live setup with the actual drum kit, I decided, you know what, the hi-hat is just all over the place. I'm definitely going to compress that because it's just the frequencies are just too loud. It's too loud. I'm going to compress that, and I decided that the overheads, I'm going to compress those, but I didn't want to put any compression on the kick because it was punching according to what I wanted. The mic is placed in a good place, da 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 da. I didn't really want to put any compression on the, you probably want to compress the snare. You probably didn't want to put any compression on the toms. Well, you probably do. But let's just say, for argument's sake, you didn't put any compression on the second tom. But you applied compression to some of the other items there to keep those volume levels in check. And just to give you a quick rundown of how compression works is, it stops the loudest frequencies from going past a particular volume level. So remember how we set everything to unity gain earlier on for those channels? Well, say I set my channel to unity gain, which is 0 decibels. So now I know that that particular channel, when it's hitting, it's pumping out up to 0 decibels. Now, because it's a mic that's picking up something, I may want it to stay at 0 decibels so it doesn't start encroaching volume-wise on the lead singer. Okay? So this is a mic that's on a hi-hat, and I don't want it to get too loud. What I can do with my compression is, I can tell the compressor to say, whenever this drummer starts playing really, really loud, I want them to stay at 0 decibels, but I want them to stay there. I don't want them to go too far above 0 decibels. I most certainly don't want them to approach 3 decibels or 4 decibels where my lead singer is. So I want this hi-hat to stay at 0 decibels. So what will happen is you can tell the compressor to say, if this hi-hat even attempts to pass 0 decibels, stop the volume. So no matter how hard the drummer whacks that compressor, whacks that hi-hat, the compressor, every time it sees the volume trying to approach 0 decibels and try and exceed it, it will hold that volume at 0 decibels. Okay? So how you set that is you do it with the threshold. So as you can see, the threshold actually starts at 0 dB. So I don't know, for argument's sake, let's just say we want to keep it at -10. So I'd set the compressor at -10. As soon as he whacks the drum beyond -10, what will happen is the compressor will kick in and it will say to the volume, you're not allowed to go this far, stop. Okay? There are other features on the compressor. So you've got your ratio. Now what the ratio is with some instruments, you don't want it to just, so say for example the hi-hat is hitting -10 decibels, that's where we want it to go. But with these instruments, particularly drums, you want them to have what we call dynamics. If the compressor just simply stopped the volume at 0 decibels, what it's doing is effectively it's squashing the sound, and the drums will sound very squashed, or that hi-hat will sound very squashed. So to allow for dynamics, what your compressor can do is it can allow for the hi-hat to exceed that -10 decibels, maybe by a decibel or 2, or depending on what you have the ratio set at. So if you say you have it as ratio 1:2, you're saying every single time that the compressor hits -10 dB, you can allow it to go over by, plus another 2 decibels. And it allows for those dynamics to come back in. So the compressor goes from having a really squashed sound to something that's a little bit more open and a little bit more dynamic in movement. It makes a huge difference hearing wise. And one of the reasons why people have a good time when they go out for a live music where there's a live band is because there's a lot of dynamics in the room. When you listen to that same band on the CD, music producers will compress a lot of that stuff. So the sound sounds really clean and very, very nice, but it lacks those dynamics that made you jump around and dance and da-da-da-da when you were listening to the live version. So that's what you do with your ratio. You sort of say, okay, even though I've instructed you to stop here, I'll allow for the extra 4 dB. And I always use the same example. Whitney Houston. There's a song she sang, I'll Always Love You. And, there's one chorus where she gets to it and she just really screams that. But if you listen to how it was done when she sang it live or in the studio, it's not like how you hear it in some of our Afro-Caribbean churches where when they go to scream into the mic, even you have to put your hands over your ears to say, my gosh, that was too loud. What compression does is it will bring the volume back down, And if you've allowed for a little bit of movement afterwards, say this is Whitney Houston singing that song "I Will Always Love You," and she's got to that part, you say, I want the ratio to be 1:4. It means that when it gets to 0 dB, the compressor will kick in, but it'll allow the volume to go past by about 4. So you'll get to hear the initial impact and the punch of the I of "I Will Always Love You," but then the compressor will kick in and say, okay, you're only going this far, now I'm going to reel you back, and you're not going to be allowed to exceed that. So it gives a little bit of room for dynamics. What the attack does is you're telling the compressor how quickly, and this is normally in milliseconds, I think milli, not micro, milliseconds, how quickly do you want the compressor to kick in. If it's 300 milliseconds, it's saying that wait 300 milliseconds, then compress the sound. If it's at nothing, you're basically saying as soon as that thing exceeds, attack. I want you to kick in and I want you to stop it. You'll find that if you wanted to squash a sound, you would set your attack to nothing, 0.1. But if you want it again to have a little bit more of dynamics, and for example, I will give you a good example of a tom. The first tom, okay? When you hit a tom, that first tom, that doo doo, then you've got doo 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 doo, that doo. What we enjoy about that first tom is that initial impact, that thump in the doo. But it has, because it's the first tom and the way it's shaped, it has a very long sharp resonance compared to the floor tom, which is really, really low. So what you want to do with your attack is, you don't want the compressor to kick in quickly. You want to allow the drummer to hit that tom and to hear that initial doo, but then you want the compressor to then kick in a little bit later on and bring everything back so that the back end of that tom isn't resonating forever. You want people to be able to hear the tom and then, okay, out. So you'd use your attack to say, wait, don't attack until a certain time, and then as soon as that time comes in, attack and bring everything back down. And what you want to do with your compressor for a tom, for example, is you want to kill off the back end as much as you can, and you want to have that initial impact with a little bit of resonance afterwards, and it just makes for a nice snappy tom where you get the impact but then you don't have the back end, because normally you'd want to go and hit the other toms as well, and you don't want them to all muffle into one where this is still sounding this doom, and you've got the boom, and they're all trying to sort of sound. You want them to be just snappy in and out, and it comes back. So that's what makes some of these really, really professional drummers sound even better, because the sound guy has really set their compression levels properly for their toms, and that's allowed for them to hit that tom and it's nice and succinct. So it's not always the actual musician that's killing it every single time you hear it sound good. A lot of the times it's the work that's been put in by the sound engineer. And what the release is again, I didn't think I'd be going into these parameters in this video, but what the release is, obviously we've told the compressor, I want you to attack after so long, but after the compressor has grabbed the volume and it's pulling it down, you can actually say to the compressor, you know what, once you've actually pulled it back down to, back to the level I want, you can release it. So you'll hear the initial impact, the compressor will kick in and it'll pull that volume back, but then you'll have like a low end resonance remain afterwards. And again, you're telling it how quickly do you want the compressor to release the sound after it's pulled it back. Do you want it to do it quickly, 50 milliseconds? Or do you want it to do it very slowly? So what I would do, for example, is if I had a really, really loud vocalist who holds their notes unnecessarily, excuse me, unnecessarily when they don't have to, I would tell the compressor, it will take some time before you release it, because by the time the compressor decides to release that sound, that specific sound that it's had to compress, because bear in mind it's not going to be compressing throughout, it'll only kick in at the time when the person exceeds the volume level that we set. So it's not going to be working 24/7 if you set it correctly. It'll only work when you need it to work. But I would tell the compressor to say, you know what, hold on to that sound for the 3000 milliseconds or whatever period of time, so that by the time it decides to release that sound, it's when it's at its very quietest. And it won't make that much of a difference. Again, with certain toms, I think it's with the floor tom or whatever, you might want to have the release set at a certain level to ensure that that floor tom resonates quite a bit. You know, you hit it that and then it resonates. And if you wanted, say for example, to have that, that hip hop, that doom 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 doom, and you wanted to have that on the floor tom, you'd tell the compressor to release the sound quickly. And then you'll have that after resonance, but you also have that distinction where if the compressor attacks quick enough, okay, you will hear the initial thump, and then it will then release the rest of it later on, so it's got that boomy sound. Whereas if it releases it much later on, you have less boomy sound at the end. So that's your release. And then finally you have your gain. Once you've compressed a signal and you're happy with where you've compressed it, sometimes it pulls the volume, the overall volume, not even sometimes, every time, it pulls the overall volume of that particular item down. And sometimes it's pulled it down a little bit too much. So whilst you're in the actual compressor, without having to change the volume on the actual channel, you can just tell the compressor, you know what, I like the compression that's on there. I'm already happy with the levels that I had earlier on. Just bump up the gain a little bit more just to bring that sound back up to where it was before we started to compress it. And you can have that gain function there to do so. So that's pretty much your compressor. Now, the difference between the VCAs and the subgroups is that on the subgroups you can apply these functionalities. So you can apply effects, you can apply EQ. So you can EQ the overall, say it's a drum kit or say it's a soprano part. You know that the sopranos don't really have that much bass in their what you call it. They don't really have that much bass in their singing. So there's no point in having all of these low end frequencies here. I mean, now we're going up. I'd go up to about 600 dB. 600 hertz, sorry. There's no point in having any of this low-end stuff with the soprano. You want your singing to be nice and clear. So I would EQ out all that low end, and then what I'd do is I'd bump in some high end, maybe about 12K. I'd bell that, and maybe at about 12K or so, I'd then bump in a little bit of high, and then what I'll do is this Q button changes the bell. Okay, so this is if you want to specifically pull out a very specific frequency and lift it, you can have the bell really, really tight. But if you want a wider range of lift, you can have it much wider there. So yeah, you just bump that up, and then you'd say that's soprano. Then for alto, you'd do something different where you'd maybe drop the low end, and then you'd also drop the top end, and you'd maybe shelve that. And then obviously for your lower end stuff, sorry, that's for tenor, and then for your alto, you might want to maybe move this a little bit more down the line so they're not encroaching on, there'll be a little bit of overlap, but essentially it allows for when people are listening to the mix on the other end, it sounds much more clearer because you have sent that group of singing to a subgroup, and then as a whole you've determined what frequencies the soprano will be singing out of, and anything in the low end which is going to be used by the altos and the tenors is left clear for them to be able to utilize that space without any more infringement, and it doesn't sound muffled, it sounds very clear. Couple that with your panning, and you pan your soprano. That's the difference between going to a place and listening to a choir and going, wow, this choir sounds amazing, and then listening to that same choir in a church where sound is done really badly and saying, oh, this choir doesn't sound very good. The people who mixed it properly can make your choir sound really, really good. Or it could be a drum kit. But likewise with the drum kit, say for example you finished setting up your kit, and you've done what you wanted to do with the different ones. You can then come in here and you can fine tune the actual drum kit itself. So say for example you hear something in the hi-hat, which is going to be probably in the high third section here, and you think there's a particular frequency that I'm hearing that I don't like. What you can do is you can come in here, and then as you're playing it, if you lift this up, you'll start to hear these frequencies more amplified, and you'll pick up on that frequency. You'll be like, yes, this is exactly it, it's that, I don't want to hear that anymore. Then if you turn that down like so, it will pull that specific frequency out, leaving your drums a lot more clearer. So you can really fine-tune your mix. If you wanted to take very specific things out of your drum, you just send it to the subgroup. You've then what did we do before we came here? We compressed the drum, so it's going to glue the whole drum kit together. It's going to sound like one unit. And then we've also EQ'd the drum. And hang on, I'm just trying to get back to that screen. There we go. So we've also EQ'd the drum. We've pulled out what we don't want and what we do want. One thing I'll tell you whilst you're in the EQ section here, this is a pretty cool thing they've included, is they've got this RTA, which is an analyzer. And what it'll do is it'll actually give you the waveform of the entire kit playing in the background. If you're on the subgroup, or if you're on the specific channel like the kick channel, etc., it will give you the waveform playing in the background. So you'll be able to see which frequencies are loud and which frequencies are quiet. Now it's not always about bringing balance, because if it sounds good and there's some quiet frequencies here, that's fine. You don't always have to have everything flat. But if you've got specific things that you're looking at and you're trying to work out, there's something that's loud in the midsection. If you turn the RTA on, you'll be able to see as the drum is playing, and you'll be able to actually see, you know what, somewhere around about here, it's actually spiking quite high, and you can come in there and you can deal with it, and more than likely that will be the thing that's causing the issue, and you can fine tune it. So that's that really. So that's your use of your subgroups, and that's pretty much the difference between VCAs and subgroups. They let you do things, whereas with VCAs it's just an overall volume. You're happy with what you set there, and you just want to be able to turn the drums up and down. You don't really need to add extra effects. You're better off just using your VCAs, and then you save your subgroups for something else. Okay, cool. Right, so coming back to the actual channel strip, you see what it's done here? So you know how we sent it to like different subgroups and different da-da-da-das? It's actually included, I don't know if you can see a faint fader, but it included it underneath so we can see what levels we have set for that here, which is it's pretty cool. They thought of everything pretty much. The final thing I'm going to talk about, because I'm conscious this video is running on for quite a bit. How long have 47 minutes, gosh. Okay. Yeah, let's just come back to master fader. Right, so the last thing that we're going to look at here is the actual channel itself. So you've got your mute, obviously. We talked about soloing the other day, where you click on it, you'll see here it'll tell you you've got something soloed, and if you don't know what you've been soloing, just turn it off and you're done. It's this section here. Now obviously in this area you can name things. So say for example I wanted to name that the kick. I could name it the kick. In fact, let me just, no, I'm deliberately spelling it wrong. You want to name it the kick, hit enter, and you've got the kick there. And then here you want to name that the snare. I'm going to deliberately spell this wrong. Snare. Hi-hat. I'm just going to call that high H T. Tom 1. Okay, so I'm just going to do that for now. What you can do, which is pretty cool with master fader, is say I don't want to have to sit here and type all of that out as I'm working. you can go back into this section here, and you've got what we call the quick assign function. By the way, if you wanted to just release this and turn it back to channel 1, just hit default name and it'll go back to channel 1. Yes, you can add an image if you wanted to. Yes, you can add different colors if you wanted to. But if you wanted to do a quick job and you don't want to have to worry about it, you can come in here. Now, under quick assign, you've got names, you've got icons, you've got colors, and you've got images. Now, if you're using a tablet and you've taken pictures of the individuals who are on the stage, those images will appear here. If you're on a phone, you might be able to pull a picture from your phone, and you can actually have the faces of the individuals down here as I would have shown you before. But the good thing about this section here is if I want to just quickly assign stuff here, I can just do kick. Now, obviously, people can triple mic a kick, and they can do all sorts. But you can just drag from this section here very quickly. Just drag stuff as you go. As you know, you've got a floor tom. You know, you've got overheads. Overheads are normally 7 and 8 if you mic it up properly. You know, you've got kit and you've got drums. So this is when you're doing your VCAs or your subgroups. You can just drag those down. What else? Kick, snare top and bottom, floor tom, rack tom, first tom, yeah, oh, hi-hat. And yeah, I'd missed something out. There we go. So you've got hi-hats. You can call it hats if you don't want to look at the word hi-hats. There's different things here that you can pick from. You can even have none. You can have computer, playback. There's so many options down here. So you can quickly set yourself up doing it that way. Then what you can do in addition to that is, I know you've got the word kick there, but if you brought an icon down, it would move kick underneath. Can you see that? So it's actually moved it underneath for you. So you can quickly set things up so that visually you can see what you're dealing with straight away. And you don't have to sit there and start worrying about, you know, I need to start assigning this bit by bit and you have them there for you. Now, one of the cool things I was going to point out to you on this section, and I think this is, for me personally, I think this is amazing. If you look at these guitars here, for me, I play bass. I know that that is a precision bass, and I know that that's a jazz bass. And when I do gigs, I sometimes take multiple basses and different types of basses, because I know that one bass is good for something and another bass is good for something else, and I'll switch between the basses. So normally people will carry some sort of P bass or humbuckers. P bass is a humbucker, and they'll carry a jazz bass, and I can specifically assign that icon, so I know if this bass player is changing his basses around and I've set him up with 2 separate channels, I can look at the stage and I can see, he's on his precision bass. Then I will pick out the precision bass and I'll EQ that, or I'll work on that particular one, or if he's on his jazz bass, if I've assigned them to separate channels. So that's a pretty cool thing. You've got rhythm guitar, you've got, you know, like I think this is a Tele or a Stratocaster type guitar. You've got acoustic, you've got violin, and you've got cello. Sorry, that's violin, that's cello. I'm not sure what that is. And the reason why I know this is cello is because it's got the extra bit at the end. If it was an upright bass, it would be straight up. But it's on the side, so it's played like a cello. That's a violin. I'm not too sure what that is. Obviously, trumpet section, piano, organ, keyboard, electric piano, drum machine. You can use that for your click tracks. Someone's asked you to plug in a phone. You've got so many options here. You've got, you know, a female singer, male singer. Nope, that's not what it should be. So let me just bring that back here and send that back to none. So it's so easy. If you make a mistake, you can quickly rectify it. Another cool thing. So say, for example, I've done that, and now I want to color assign all my different items on here so they have the same colors. I can do that straight away. Remember, I told you earlier on that this is fully customizable. So I can have all my drums as one color. Now if you're on a tablet, this is much more easier to do because you're literally just dragging and dropping. And then if you wanted for your bass guitars, you're having this and for your singers, etc. So yeah, you can select your colors, and remember we started off with kick in there and it had it there, then we put the icon and we brought it down. If you put the picture, it'll bring it there. And then obviously if you've got images of individuals, so you can quickly set yourself up quite quickly. Now look at what happens at the top here. You can now clearly see where your drum sections are, you can clearly see where your bass guitars are, because all the colors are now appearing. So as you build this up, it becomes more and more clear as to what it is you're actually doing with your mixer, and that's using the quick assign. You can do this one by one by specifically going in here, clicking on image, going into your camera, taking a snapshot, or if you've got 3 different drummers on the day, then you can pick a different drummer. And this is good in the sense that if you can save profiles for certain things. So for example, let me just go into our subgroup here. Okay, so I'm in the subgroup and I've got a compression setting here for this particular drum kit. And say I know that this was Jesse who was playing this drum kit, so I heavily compressed the drum because I know how much of a powerful drummer he is. What I can do is I can store that setting here and I can name it Jesse. Okay, so if for example I see the church has been set up and someone else has been on the drums and they're playing along, and and then Jesse shows up and someone says, hey, no, Jesse's here, let Jesse play. You can quickly come into your drum subgroup here, go into your presets, and Jesse's there already. So you can literally click on Jesse, hit recall, it will set the compression for Jesse. If you EQ'd, say, the kick, so let's go back here. If you EQ'd the kick, for example, and the snare and all this stuff, and you EQ'd it for Jesse, you EQ'd it for the other drummers in your church, and you set a specific EQ, again, you can come in here and you can say, okay, this is the EQ that I set for when Jesse's playing, and this is what works best with his foot when he's on fire. You could set an EQ for when he's tired, and you think, okay, fair enough, he didn't really play that hard, so I had to go easy on my settings. But when he's he looks like he's got a bit of energy, you can set different presets. You can then call this one this is Jesse when he's tired, for example. So the EQ is doing a little bit more to give him the energy that it needs. And what you can do is you can come down and say, okay, when he's really playing hard, I really want to bring some of these frequencies down, because he's really fighting. And then you can come back here and then you can store that, and notice how I've only made changes. Jesse fire, I'll call it that. So notice how I've only made certain change. Now look at this bell here and how deep that is. If I see halfway through that he's now beginning to play as if he's tired, I can literally just say hit that, boom, it'll change it straight away. So you can set different presets for your singers. You can set them for when Sister Rudo's on the lead mic, or someone else is on the lead mic, or if you've got different drummers, different bass players, people bring different types of instruments. I like to swap my basses around, and you can set different presets, and you can always recall those presets as and when you need to, rather than doing the EQ all over again. And sometimes they could just halfway through a song, you might find that something happens and the lead mic gets handed over to somebody else. Now personally, if I was doing sound, I would tell the choir, don't swap microphones. But if you find that it has happened and they've decided in the spur of the moment they're going to hand this mic to someone because they're better at leading a particular song, then what you could do is, even though you've got this channel and this mic preset to a particular individual in terms of their EQ, if you have that person's EQ profile stored here, you don't have to worry too much, because you can just sort of come into there and you can say, you can just come into here, find that individual, hit that, hit record, and automatically their EQ profile, and bear in mind you need to have set this profile up on that specific mic. So if you just threw, say for example, you stored that profile and they were singing on an SM58, and then later on, they've come and they've grabbed an SM50, they've grabbed a Sennheiser or something. You can't just slap that EQ profile from that different mic onto the new one. I mean, you can try, but different mics have different frequency response range presets to them. It's not always going to work that way. The shape is different, so therefore you can't be guaranteed that it will work. It might make it worse. So make sure that when you name these, you could definitely say, say I want to come back into this, recall. Does this let me? Oh yeah, there we go. And then you can say this was on the SM58. I mean, if you wanted to, you could call in a Saturday and you could say to all your singers, right, we're going to get you profiles on each and every one of these mics, and then you can store another preset where you say that's the Sennheiser preset, boom. So that way, if you know, okay, they've grabbed the Sennheiser and that's the one I'm going to recall, bam, and you've got the settings stored already. So you don't need to worry too much about thing. And bear in mind, we're on channel 1, right? Let me show you something here. Really cool. If I went into channel, you can store gate settings and things, but if I went into channel 4, even though I'm now on a different channel, those presets will follow me. So you don't have to say, oh, I set them up on channel 1, do they have to be? No, the presets will follow you. You can install that in any place. If you decide your channel 1 isn't working, but you want to use the kick on a different channel, you can just move those settings across. You can do cool things like this. Let me show you what I mean. You can copy, come here. Now you can either paste every single thing that's on there, or you can just paste the processing. And what it's done is it's just pasted the processing, but certain things it's left out. Or you can paste all. If you paste all, it will literally copy every single thing that's on there, not just the processing on its own, but it'll paste everything. So for example, if you look at this channel here, if you look at the gain, there's no gain on there. But whereas if we copied it from there, there is gain. So I just processed the processing, whereas if I wanted to do all, it doesn't matter. I don't have to go in there and sort of thing. It remembers I've just copied, so literally paste all, and then now I should have gain on there. Okay, so maybe it doesn't bring the gain across. That's fine. You can always reset that up, because when you come into the gain section here, what channel is this? Channel 11. So the cool thing is when you come into the gain section here, you can see what channel 1's gain is like, so you can bring it up roughly to where it was anyway. So it's not like it's a big deal that it didn't copy the gain across, but it's just options. They just give you options upon options upon options. So we've gone through all of this stuff. There's image, color, we've done that. We went into the quick assign. The next thing is you can link 2 channels across. So this is particularly for keyboards, for anything that's a thing. Just bear in mind, if I click on this, it'll say link 11 over to 12. 11 and 12 are a linked pair. It's because of how they've designed the mixer. However, 12 and 13 are not a linked pair. It's always going to be 11 and 12. So it'll say 12 back into 11 and 11 into 12. 13 will be 14. So if you see I click on that, and 14 will be 13. So you can't sort of randomly pick. They come already in pairs. So because 1 is 2, that means 3 is 4, and 5 is 6. You can never have 2 to 3. It's going to be 1 into 2. And you can link the 2 channels together. So if you've already put all your settings there, just link the channels together. And then it'll bring the 2 over 11 into 12. If you make a mistake and you think, oh, I made a mistake, it's just as simple as that. and you've unlinked it. There's no hassle, there's no stress, and again, there's presets that are already there. You can import and you can export presets, but you know, there's endless options available to you. I'm going to stop this video at this point in time now, because I think we've done quite a lot for you to take in, and we'll carry on with the overview of Master Fader, but we'll still go back into the channel because there's much more we still need to cover within the actual channel itself. So I'll do these in stints, but for now, this is just an overview of how the different channels work and how you can utilize Master Fader 5 with your Mackie mixer. Alright, peace. Stop this.